to spend our time together tonight. Who is at the very beginning of the process? You're just learning about the Sloan Fellows. Great, wonderful. And I see some familiar faces. So who's either hit submit or getting ready to hit submit on an application? Getting ready to hit submit. Okay, great. And I know we're chatting tomorrow, right? Yeah, interview tomorrow. So we have the whole spectrum. So the way I planned on using our time tonight together is I will quickly walk through sort of what MIT Sloan is, what our values are, what the community is, also a little bit more about the Sloan Fellow experience. But I know that it's really important, and while you're all here, is to hear from our current students. So I will make sure to carve out plenty of time throughout the process for us to hear more from you and maybe less from me as the evening sort of progresses. And then at the end, I will talk at a high level about the application, what we look for, what we recommend, what my tips and tricks are, and then we'll wrap it up with a bit more Q&A before hopefully we go back out into a non-rainy evening. But just quickly, I'm Katy, Radoll. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at MIT Sloan. I've been at the school since 2011, almost always working with our executive level students. This time I'm fully on the admission side of the program, and love it because I get to see students from the prospective stage all the way through current students, and then our alumni, you know, when we're out on the road or when we're welcoming new classes, play a huge role in being a part of that community with us. So I feel like we get to see you at all stages of the process. I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves quickly, and then I promise we'll come back to them as the night progresses.
Sure. We'll stop. Yeah, well, first off, thank you guys for the opportunity to be here with you guys today. Really excited to share our experience and happy to answer any questions that you guys have. My name is Jill, and I'm actually from Boston, so I've lived here my entire life. And I actually, prior to MIT, spent my entire career with the Boston Celtics. So that's the basketball team in Boston. And started out in a sales role, so actually selling primarily tickets to individuals and businesses. And most recently have been in sales management and worked with our diversity and inclusion committee as well on hiring top talent.
Hi guys, my name's James. As you can see, I'm from both the United Kingdom and Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong. I then went to school in the United Kingdom before coming here. I was a trained CPA in London. I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers as a tax consultant after graduation, and subsequently worked for a number of startup businesses, and most recently as the group finance manager at a fintech startup.
Great, thank you. And both are current Sloan Fellows, so halfway through your program, or 2/3, I guess. Yeah. And we'll graduate in June of 2019. Also in the room, you may not be able to see my colleague Anne offline. She is a member, part of the admissions team like myself, and she is managing all of our online participants from around the world. So we'll take questions from everyone out there as well as the night progresses. Sound good? Okay. Great. So I'm just going to start with a quick video.
MIT is an incredible place. It has a mission that I very much believe in, and that is to try to bring knowledge to solve the world's great challenges. And I think the Sloan School of Management plays a critical role in that.
The first time I kind of walked through the doors, you know, you see the big statement of the vision and the mission of the Sloan School to develop principled leaders who will make an impact to improve the world. I think that immediately resonated with me.
One of the aspects that I value and admire about the students in the program is their commitment to personal and professional development at mid-career.
You challenge yourself while you're here. It's not that you're just come here to study, you come here to challenge yourself to be a better leader, to become a better professional.
We as a group talked many times about how you go from success, because all of us certainly felt successful when we came here, to significance.
The MIT Sloan Fellows program is created on the foundation of 3 interdependent pillars: leadership, innovation, and global perspective. These pillars are designed to enhance global leadership skills, champion innovation, and view the world through a broader lens with a greater understanding of how economic, social, and political factors can impact an organization.
The great thing about the Sloan Fellows program is that you're really learning from your cohort. They are subject matter experts within their own fields, and they really bring a lot of diversity of thought into the process.
There's an impressive amount of talent density in this place. But it's not about that one individual, but rather the collective effort of the whole group.
We have a phrase that says no fellow left behind, and we very much to that particular mantra.
Everybody has a great sense of helping each other out and thinking that they are part of a system which is bigger than them.
It's a very good combination of hard and intense, but also very human.
Well, the Sloan Fellow students are very international. They're completely global from, I think, every single corner of the world. And I teach global economics, global management, global political analysis. So it's great fun. I just basically line up the conversation, give them the right material, and we go at it.
Professors weren't just saying that they wanted to get everyone involved, but actually getting people.
The accessibility is amazing. From just a conversation to a cup of coffee, to an email that's answered at 10 p.m.
The program prepares you for career advancement and to be a leader who can tackle the world's most important challenges.
That mission statement really sets this institution, and more specifically this program, up from its pure set.
From the very early moment that I was visiting the school, I knew it was the right choice for me.
We really believe in the values that this university stands for.
So there's an incredible sort of energy in this place overall that I think one can only feel.
I think every one of us would tell you that we are changed forever by this experience.
So if you are in that moment, just take the opportunity. Don't wait.
So I think one of our main goals tonight is that you find yourself in the community, that you see yourself in what we present to you tonight as an MIT Sloan Fellows experience, and even that beyond that, the greater MIT and MIT Sloan community as a whole. So we are going to talk a little bit about the components of the program and a little bit about the application, but hopefully what you take away from tonight is that you can see yourself as part of this community. So quickly, we are a very mission-driven institute, and we do really talk about our mission here at MIT Sloan as we're thinking about the types of people that we're inviting into our community, the type of curriculum and content and problems in the world that we hope our students are solving when they become alumni or even as students. The mission of MIT Sloan is to develop principled, innovative leaders who improve the world. And I often see people sort of, oh yeah, that's lofty. I really do think that that is something that we hold very near and dear to every conversation that we have here. It's not unusual that I will have conversations about being very principled in the approach we're taking. Innovation is in the water here. It is a very iterative environment. If you're comfortable tinkering, comfortable sort of peeling back the layers and trying to get it better the next time, not right the next time, but better, this is maybe an institute that is comfortable for you. So I often get the question, why should I go back to school? I have 15 years of experience. And usually that question is probably, if you're at this point in the process, probably coming from your friends and family or your colleagues. You're progressing in your career. Why take that step back? I think it's exactly that. You are moving forward at a pace that it's right to take a step back and sort of reevaluate what kind of leader, what kind of impact you want to have on the world. That you're looking to gain new tools to challenge the sort of conventional ways of the way your industry or your business or the people around you are tackling problems. I promise you are going to get an incredible academic education here. It is a very transformational experience, so I think that's something we can touch upon with our current students in a moment. It's more than just the academic experience. It's about gaining a better understanding of who you are as a leader, who you are when you come in, and what kind of leader you want to be when you leave. There's a pretty significant blanking on my words tonight, emphasis on having a transformational experience. The words I hear a lot from alumni include confidence and language, that they now find themselves sitting at tables making decisions across different business units in their organizations or even outside of their industry with their stakeholders, and they have a language they didn't know they didn't have before, that it's giving them a confidence to ask the right questions and to sort of peel back the layers of whatever that problem or solution being presented to you is. And if that's exciting to you, then maybe it is the right time to take a step away from your career, spend 12 months at MIT, and really transform into a more impactful leader. So at MIT Sloan, we look at our degree programs as a portfolio. We have 3 pathways to an MBA. 2 of those are what we call executive level. We're obviously here tonight to talk about the Sloan Fellows MBA program. It's been a part of MIT Sloan for now almost 90 years, getting very close to that milestone. It's always been a mid-career focused MBA program for folks that are at executive levels, at mid to senior levels in their careers, 10, 12, 14, 15, upwards of 20 years of work experience. Very similar in demographics is our traditional executive MBA. While we consider them both executive level, the difference is that structure, the cadence that you come to school. In the Sloan Fellows program, you take a full sabbatical from your professional life. You take a step out of that professional path. In the EMBA, you are required to work full-time and go to school once or twice a month over 20 months. So that's the real, there are other differences, but from a structural experience, that's probably the most significant difference. And then we have our more traditional full-time 2-year MBA. We also have a handful of dual degree MBA programs across MIT, as well as a partnership with the Kennedy School at Harvard, and a business analytics degree and a master's of finance. And then, of course, you'll see sprinkled throughout the school our undergraduates from MIT and our PhD and postdocs. So, what is the Sloan Fellows MBA program? You do earn an MBA. You're not earning an executive MBA. You're earning a Master's of Business Administration from the Sloan School of Management at MIT. About 90% of our students will opt to pursue the MBA. About 10% will ultimately pursue a thesis, which will garner them the credential of a Master's of Science in either management or technology. Are either of you pursuing thesis? Okay. I think as the credential of an MBA becomes more and more popular around the world, that has just been where students have found themselves over the last decade. We have no preference. It plays no part in the admissions process. It's what's best for you to take that next step forward in your career. You know your industry and your functions better. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that you would use a majority of your electives to pursue that thesis, and you would do a lot of writing in your 12 months here. It is an incredibly rigorous, data-driven program. It's MIT. You'll hear me say later, we want you to be quant comfy or comfortable with the analytics, comfortable using data. It's the full general management curriculum of a 2-year MBA, but at an executive pace, at a much more accelerated pace. You have a full immersion into MIT. You are an MIT graduate student who's a member of the MIT Sloan Fellows program. So you have all the access that any MIT graduate student has throughout the institution, whether that's to be a part of clubs, to lead initiatives, or to cross-register, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. It's, in addition to being a data-driven, sort of the science of management, how are you using data to drive decision-making, it's still a general management curriculum. That's very much the hallmark of MIT. It is a very flexible curriculum. About half of your curriculum, or 60%, is core, so required. We choose that content for you. And the other 40-45% is elective. That's that flexibility. You get to design how your academic experience can be. And we'll dive more into that in a few slides. So the curriculum in the Sloan Fellows, on top of what we just spoke about, is really based on 3 pillars. I'm not going to dive too far into these, but they do show up as themes throughout the 12-month experience. We talked about this being a transformational experience, that you're here not only to gain the tools and the frameworks to be better at your role, but really to be a better leader, to drive business decisions and manage through data, manage through those different analytical frameworks that you're gaining here. Innovation's everywhere. It's in the water. I would say it's pretty unavoidable at MIT. And if you're comfortable with that tinkering mentality of always doing it better the next time, then it's, I think you'll really find that you enjoy the experience here. And then again, the global experience. You'll see throughout the room even now that a lot of our students come from all over the world to join the Sloan Fellows, who are about 80% non-US citizen. And those other 80% of the class comes from upwards of 30, 35 different countries year over year. So who's teaching this? We saw Simon Johnson in the video. He is currently the faculty director of the MIT Sloan Fellows and has been now for many years, about 5 or 6 years. He was previously the chief economist at the IMF, did a lot of work in the Obama White House in terms of economic policy, and he is a fixture, much like the other faculty that you see on the screen. They are not just someone who shows up to your lecture, teaches, and then goes back to their office. They are having coffee at breaks. They're coming to social events to get to know our students better. They are you are as much a part of their community as they are of ours. And oftentimes I see them having coffee and lunch in the cafeteria. They are everywhere. They are not just great award-winning faculty, they're also research faculty. So by coming into the classroom with rich professional experiences, they're very hungry to understand what's really going on outside of academia. How are the frames and the tools that you're learning here really working once you go back out into the real world? So you see that sort of cyclical cycle with our faculty, our students, and our alumni always learning and applying what's going on in the real world to the classroom. So curriculum. Traditionally, we would think about this as 3 semesters. We break it out a little bit more here for you. In the first column, you'll see orientation. That happens in April, a few months before our students matriculate for their summer term. That is very much run by our current students in conjunction with the program office. But some of that we are just checking some boxes to make sure that you're ready to come to campus in June, hit the ground running. In other ways, it's a lot of trading of secrets, showing you how to hit the ground running, where to live, and providing advice. Since it is a 12-month program, there's not a lot of overlap between graduating Sloan Fellows and incoming Sloan Fellows. So we find that it's a great experience for students to interact with each other. Your summer term is where you have a majority of your required core coursework. Those are those general management courses that we talked about. You will have 9 required general management courses. 7 of them occur in the summer. They don't all happen at once. They may happen 2 or 3 at a time. You may have finance in the morning and marketing in the afternoon, and then you may have a different cadence of courses a few days later. But we do, in the program office, try to spend as much time thinking about the pedagogical impacts on you and what makes sense to have before another course versus after a certain set of lectures. I like to think of our core at MIT as divided into 2 buckets. So there's the analytical frameworks. Those are all those science of management, data-driven tools tools you use to make data-driven decisions. That is system dynamics, micro and macroeconomics, and then we have our second bucket, which is the business essentials. Those are all represented by different business units, most likely in many of your organizations. The vice president of marketing, the vice president, or a C-suite title that oversees a business unit. What we're hoping is that when you're constantly combining those in the classroom, you're sort of giving and taking on how those overlap together and how they play off each other. Right now, we come back in the fall, you'll have a few of your core classes, but really at that point, your flexibility becomes prominent in your experience. You dive into the elective offerings here at MIT. I think this is a really unique aspect of our 12-month program, is that you have this intense summer experience with your peer group of Sloan Fellows, and then in the autumn, in September, you are integrated into the rest of the Sloan community to take all of those elective courses. Sometimes you have hundreds of electives to choose from. You can also cross-register across MIT at other schools and other centers for excellence, or you can cross-register at our friends up the river, Harvard, at one of their professional schools. So in your elective courses, you'll have 2-year MBA, Sloan Fellows, postdocs, undergrads and Harvard students all at the same time. So that network becomes really, really expansive and very, very rich. We're currently in the blue section. It's traditionally around MIT called IAP, or Independent Activities Period. It's about a 6-week break from school. Our Sloan Fellows do a number of things. Do you guys want to share how you spent your IAP?
Sure. I took 3 courses from Sloan, which was quite heavy. But on top of that, I am also taking an AI and machine learning course on autonomous vehicles. And not to mention, actually, it's 4 courses. The 4th one from Sloan is actually called How to Win Texas Hold'em.
That's a very popular course.
Yes.
I also took 3 courses for credit during the IAP, and then I've been trying to take as many of the non-credit courses as I can. So I took Introduction to R, Understanding Islam. I went to the observatory outside of Cambridge. I think a few of us are going to go. There's, you can go, it's like the bell ringing in Boston. So visiting, I think, the Old North Church and learning about kind of the bells. So I've just been trying to, take advantage of as much as possible.
Some students may choose to travel home or travel abroad as part of research or other coursework that has a travel component. It's really up to you. In the Sloan Fellows course program specifically, there is no requirement of how you spend your time over IAP. Other degree programs at MIT have requirements during the January period, but in the Sloan Fellows, it is incredibly flexible. You can spend it how you want. I love hearing that you took advantage of what's going on campus. Everything from negotiations to learning a very technical analytical tool to learning how to win poker games.
Yes. I know some fellows has actually gone to, so one, Patrick went to Hong Kong, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And then a few went to Israel we have a very famous Israel lab where you go off there for 3 weeks, I think, to meet businesses, work with businesses, and meet some politicians. And then I'm thinking there was another trip. And then other MBA students that I know went to various countries, dotted around the globe, to do projects or just to explore. Henrietta came back from Bhutan and India. So yeah, IAP is a period where you go and do very interesting things. I mentioned earlier to one of the candidates here that one of our fellows who has space ambitions, I literally mean space, I think he went off to a course on how to land something on Mars. So you can immerse yourself across MIT. I'm actually quite sad. I was meant to go to Holland with MIT Driverless, again, another autonomous vehicle. This one is a MIT undergrad and postgraduate racing team that is trying to automate a race car. And they're at the moment partnering up with the University of Netherlands, and I arranged the whole trip, booking all the flights and everything for them, but I couldn't go.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know, so I'm here.
You could be a resource in the future, right?
I'm planning to be there in July when we go for the race.
Fantastic. You'll have to let us know. So the students will come back in February. I mentioned it's a pretty long break, and they'll have their final semester, predominantly electives. This particular year, you'll see that they do have one last required course. That is really gives and takes year to year. It depends on faculty teaching schedules and faculty availability. So this year you'll have one additional course, but next year that may change. The schedule is usually available by the time orientation rolls around. Those negotiations and decisions are made at the institute level with faculty. So I talked a little bit about this already, that there's lots of ways to customize that experience. I highlighted a few here. One of the great parts about being in the executive level MBA is that you also have a lot of opportunities to take classes in January with executive MBA students and alumni. So again, a greater access to that network and networking opportunities. You can cross-register up to 3 times around the Cambridge or MIT and Harvard system. And new this spring, the students in the last couple of years, and especially this year, have really led the drive on establishing an entrepreneurship and innovation track for just Sloan Fellows. This is a way that they can customize and specialize and sort of check some boxes that signal to the market that, look, I've taken this coursework in MIT, it's almost like a minor specialization. MIT is behind my specialization in entrepreneurship and innovation. Are either of you involved in that?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Great.
So we have arranged a trip to Silicon Valley and the Bay Area in March during the spring break.
Yeah.
When it is, to go and talk to companies, VCs, people like that. So this year is very much a student-led event. We have about over a third, actually 40 students sign up to go to San Francisco. So it's a bit of a logistical challenge, but we're managing it.
I think it's also a great example of if something doesn't exist at MIT or at Sloan or in the Sloan Fellows, then create it, make it happen. And maybe it existed before, and you know the needs of the student body turn over and it may go dormant, and you can always revive it, or you can always find a way to customize it to fit the needs of the population that's here now. And that's a great example of how feedback drove that decision making. There's a lot of feedback collection. We make data-driven decisions here as well. Even we don't just stand by what we teach you in class. And so a lot of students are driving their own initiatives. It may not impact you, but it will definitely impact future classes. And I think that is a very meaningful part of our community here. I mentioned earlier that you are part of the greater MIT community, but I think it's important to sort of break down what that means. At the Sloan Fellows level, there's an incredible program team that is constantly creating programming, from a 360 leadership assessment before you show up on campus, which comes with executive one-on-one coaching, to when you're at MIT and you take advantage of maybe action learning. If you want to gain access to a new industry or a new function or a new part of the world, you can sign up for an action learning elective, like experiential learning. You're assigned to a small team that works with a real company on a real problem. What James mentioned earlier, some of those students travel as part of that experience. There's a lot of projects in January in the Southern Hemisphere, I find, warm and you can escape the snow. But some of those projects happen around the Boston and New York area as well, so they don't have as strong a travel component. It's up to you how you want that experience to be. And then again, at the greater MIT level, I highlighted a few of the more popular. Obviously, the Martin Trust Center, which is first on the list and not bolded, happens to sit on Sloan's campus. So I think we find a lot of our students over there taking advantage of the resources or just hanging out and listening to what's going on in the Entrepreneurship Center. The 100K Challenge, very popular at MIT. You gain some great mentorship, great access to sort of what's going on in the ecosystem beyond MIT, even in the Cambridge, Kendall Square area. Sometimes it's hard to remember, to figure out what's MIT and what's just happening in Cambridge, because there's so much going on here. You'll barely scratch the surface. We get a lot of questions about career support. I think some of these questions tend to be very one-on-one, so if you have very specific questions, I'm happy to stay around later tonight and answer those for you. But I think it's important that we point out that we do have a dedicated career development team within our greater support office, and they have a variety of programming, some of it very structured, some of it very informal, such as the networking opportunities with your fellow students and then across the alumni network. But they are supporting our sponsored students, who are what's traditionally called bonded to their company, so they're gonna return to their organization. Students that have no formal sponsorship but have an open door to return. Maybe they're in constant communication or conversations with their previous organization. And then our career searchers, what's next for you? What are you going to do? What's going to spark your interest? And how are you going to pivot when you leave here? They're supporting all of those kinds of students. What I think is the most important thing to say is at the mid-career level, it's not a placement office. The types of opportunities that you're going to be looking for are more senior level manager roles. You want to grow into something that has a higher decision-making value, and those types of roles don't live in a traditional MBA recruiting process. So it does take a lot of rolling up your sleeves and networking and being ready for when that opportunity arises for you to start having conversations to carve out those new roles for you. But again, I think those tend to be really one-on-one topics, so I'm happy to stay around, or I'll give you my card and we can set up a phone call. And the other kind of support system, I think this is just as important as everything else we talked about, you are probably not in this decision to get by yourself. And I think it's really important that I would encourage you to have this conversation with all of the people that are going to support you in this decision. It's an incredible network of not just our students and our alumni and our faculty and our staff, but it's an incredible network of significant others, husbands, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, partners, whatever that is for you, parents, children. The Sloan Fellows, I think, really set the tone at the school level, what that feels like for your partner and your families. We highly encourage our students, no matter where in the world they're coming from, that their families come with them and experience this. From day one, they're a part of the experience. There's lots of programming for them. There's significant other clubs. They even plan their own trips. They do a lot of their own work in the community. So we want to make sure that you're having a conversation with them about what this experience is going to be like for you and for them. Just a list of all the other support systems. I think I talked about earlier what a community we have here, and I think this really emphasizes that it is an incredibly collaborative, supportive community. You are not in this alone. There are lots of what I call safety nets along the way to make sure students are moving forward together. Oftentimes that's your own classmates. It's also your advisors in the program, your go-to person to talk about anything and everything. And it's your faculty. It's the Entrepreneurship Center when you're ready to take that leap and start talking about, well, how do you start a company and how do I take those first steps? It's out there, and oftentimes at MIT you have to go and pull it towards you, but it does exist. It does exist. So some of you have probably seen these stats. They're not that far off from what we have on our website. I'm just going to highlight a few. I said earlier that it's a highly international audience in the Sloan Fellows, 37 countries represented in this year's Sloan Fellows class out of 111 students. As a community in MIT, we're about 40% non-US citizen and 60% US citizens. So it does find a balance in there when you're back out in the greater community, but it creates an incredible global conversation, how people are managing through challenges within their own industries or within their own country borders or regional borders. And again, you're all here because you know this is a mid to senior level executive program, but just to point out that the average years of work experience is 14 years. It's quite a range. This is a very self-selective process to when people choose to go back to school at the middle part of their careers. It's a range of 10 to 20, upwards of 21, 22, and even further sometimes. There's not always going to be a perfect time to go back to school, which is why we see that greater range in our Sloan Fellows program. So I'm going to stop here. I promised I would do less talking eventually. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to toss over to our current students. And we'll take some from the audience and our virtual audience, and then we'll talk quickly about the admissions process. So my first question for you guys is, what was if there was a trigger point or a point where you thought, I think I need to take that step back? How did you find your way to here? Did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Being at the Celtics for 14 seasons, I felt like being in sales throughout that time, maybe I was a little bit one-dimensional, and so I really, having a business background from Babs in college, undergrad, I really enjoyed learning about all these, different facets that you need to think about as an executive leader. And so looking at the MBA programs, what stood out to me about MIT obviously is just the innovation and the ecosystem here, all the different resources that you have compared to what I saw at other schools. And learning more about the program and talking to prior Sloan Fellows about how supportive and collaborative your classmates are in kind of your growth process, your access to an individual leadership coach. I think that really stood out to me and is something I've talked with a few friends from the Harvard Kennedy School that other programs just don't have. And so, thinking about sports and how much, technology is kind of disrupting the way that we're doing business, this was the perfect fit, not only on the business side, being prepared, as you mentioned, to have that vocabulary and that background to understand how technology is going to intersect with sports, but also personally having, amazing resources to kind of work on myself and make sure that I'm going to be, the best leader that I can be for future teams.
Cool. Well, thank you for saving me from giving me some time to think. But I think I shared Jill's initial thought, which is I've been a CPA for 12 years or thereabouts, and whilst I've worked in different businesses, I'm always sort of looking for something new, something interesting to add value to not just the company, but to myself. So sometimes you kind of step back and go, undergraduates have all that fun to do all these amazing things. And it sort of dawned on me, one of my interns, I think he's about 20 years old from Denmark, and was talking to me about fintech, so individual fintech. He was talking about this company called Revolut and all that wonderful companies. And I work in a fintech company and I don't really know what he was talking about. So I was like, hang on a second. Time to really go and procrastinate a little bit on your computer, tap, 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 and you realize there's a bigger world out there. So I guess one of the things that people often ask me, given that we are sort of mid-career, is that can you really afford to do this? Can you take that year out from your career that many of you will be having high-flying careers? Can you take that year out to literally take a step back? But my answer to that, having thought about it for some time, is actually, can you afford not to do it? Because there's just so many things going on out there. If I hadn't taken, that's my background is in engineering, so all these robotics, AI are very exciting to me, except I never have time to sort of sit back, relax, and actually read the latest magazine about these technologies. So it dawned on me that coming here, take a year out to look at opportunities and explore new ideas is the right thing to do. So I guess the key point is, I came here with an idea that AI and machine learning is the way forward. So I'm going to try and dive into that because that's what MIT is known for. Except after I've come here with all the other exciting candies that you get thrown at you, you kind of go, oh, now I really want to learn about blockchain. So that's ended up what I focused on. And still dabbling in a little bit of AI, and that's what IAP has turned into, which I'm hoping to learn more about deep learning and stuff like that next week. So there's just so many things out there that you can't afford not to take a year out to just come and explore, I think.
But I have one more question for you guys while you guys sort of think about what your questions are. And you both talked about sort of discovering new things around MIT once you got here, or that's what pulled you here. Is there one class you could share, or one faculty that you could share that was really instrumental in that flexible or exploratory experience that you had during your Sloan Fellows time?
Sure, I'll take this one first. We've seen Simon Johnson and actually Tabney as well, two faculty on the page. Whilst I talk about all these technology things, which is what T stands for in MIT, there's actually, we are very well, we're not very well known, despite the fact that we are probably the second most awarded institute for economics. And I was, just for egotistic reasons, I was looking into, given that we know Simon Johnson was the chief economist at the IMF in the late 2000s, we had a talk about euros being 20 years old from 5 professors from here, Harvard, and also in the Fletcher School, just within Boston. And one of the panelists is now no longer, well, he's not a full-time professor here, but he's associated, and he is the successor to Simon Johnson as the chief economist of the IMF. And so I thought, oh, how interesting, 2 people from MIT representing the world of economics. So I looked into who else come from MIT, and the latest appointee, a lady who comes from Harvard from 1st of January, but the preceding 5 IMF chief economists were all associated with MIT. So my best experience so far has to be with Simon and Tabney talk about economics. And Roberto, of course, gave us a different perspective of micro and macroeconomics. Simon, being the chief economist, he gave a class to just the Sloan Fellows, traditionally, on global economics. So not talking about equations, but much more about how the world works. That was particularly interesting.
And you've mentioned Roberto and Tabney, who we had on the screen. They, a lot of their research and what they're doing out in the world when they're not in school, in class, is in emerging markets, and especially with Tabney, with
well, she's in Africa.
in Africa with M-Pesa. I talked to a few of you earlier about that. So they have their areas of focus, and that comes into the classroom, and faculty draw on each other. They bring people in all the time.
Before Jill starts, if you have your pen and paper handy, Roberto Rigobon. If you catch that, Google him for some YouTube videos. He's fantastic.
I would second that.
Just, the opportunity to be here, and the professors are just absolutely unbelievable. So it's really hard to try to just pick one or a few. But I would say, initially Tabney kind of blew me away. The work that she's doing in Kenya with universal basic income, I think just kind of blew my mind. And, to James's point earlier, just like the possibilities that are at your fingertips by being here is just amazing. And in terms of, experimenting, I think actually a professor that I didn't even have personally, I was over at the Martin Trust, kind of exploring, actually learning about laser cutting, which was really fun. So helped out my friend with the Egypt table for our culture fair. We laser cut a little photo cutout thing. But I met Bill Aulette there through somebody who had taken his class, and he's a big Celtics fan, so we kind of got to chatting. And a few days later, he emailed me. I had a meeting with one of the entrepreneurship in residence over there, and I may, potentially be working on a project with them, regarding sports and just all the resources over there, learning about 3D printing and laser cutting and entrepreneurship. That's kind of really made me think about how I'm going to experiment and explore during the rest of my time here. So that's probably the biggest experience.
It's also fun too.
Yeah.
What questions do you guys have? If you don't, I have plenty.
Yeah, just to get a bit of insight into kind of the entrepreneurship ecosystem that you get to. You mentioned the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Track. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and how and what that actually entails? And you mentioned blockchain as well. Are you kind of pursuing that in an entrepreneurial kind of spirit as well?
So if you look back at the video, a few slides ago, there were 3 columns. One was MIT Sloan, next one is MIT, Sloan Fellows, MIT Sloan, and then MIT. In the middle of it, you will see this thing called action learning, and that's something that I hugely value. And that is a way for us to not just sit in a classroom to learn something, but actually go out there and do something. In terms of action learning, there are, the way I think about entrepreneurship, or at least the way the school thinks about entrepreneurship, have at least 3 ways. There's a course called New Enterprises, where a student gathers together, people come up with ideas, you form teams, you go and then develop it. And it is actually taught by Bill Aulette with his method of 24 steps to discipline entrepreneurship. That one, you go through the process, iterate, and hopefully create a business, but that's not the main point. That one's really about learning the process of how you can think about being an entrepreneur. A different angle to that is called Innovation Team, or I-Teams, we call it. Innovation Team is basically, it's a course where students, it's partnered up with MIT researchers, where they look at existing technologies and discoveries that they have, and you as the business students or other students with business interests come together to think about how you can commercialize, how can you bring this product or discovery to the world. So this time is an existing technology or idea that is for you to explore the business aspects. And I think finally there's another one called eLab, Entrepreneurship Lab, which is probably the slightly more ahead version, which is there's a company with existing products, with existing ideas, that you go out and help them in much more of a consultant, but they are small companies, so that's where the entrepreneurialness come into it. So 3 different stages of doing entrepreneurship. as part of the track, you have to have done new enterprises as a course. And in terms of the action learning, there's two requirements. One's called a product requirement, and the other one is a firm requirement, such that you actually get a broad spectrum of not just sitting in the classroom or practicing an idea, you actually have to go and do it. On top of that, there's, as we mentioned, the 100K, which is the big grand prize in the spring semester, where people with ideas, be that from any of those three tracks, probably mostly from the former, so your new enterprises, potentially the I-team, where you actually go out and pitch to not just the school, but professional investors with the grand prize of $100,000 in cash to help you launch a business potentially. Furthermore, they're literally, I can't give you all the names, but they're literally a slide that the Entrepreneurship Center put together in terms of the availability of funding and programs and stuff like that. There's Sandbox, there is Delta V, which is an accelerator. There is just so many things that you can get involved. But in terms of the track itself, there are certain requirements of courses, actions you have to do. 100K is one of the requirements, not one of the requirements, but it falls into one of the hands-on requirements on top of the two already mentioned. So the certificate, it's geared such that it gives you a focus. I think it adds a lot of value in terms of giving you a way to structure, because as Katy mentioned, there are 100+ electives. And for me personally, I have to really think about, okay, do I want to do entrepreneurship stuff, economic stuff? And when I say economics, there could be the traditional thing that you think about as economics and microeconomics, to your global trading, to, at the moment, I'm struggling trying to find time to do game theory, behavior economics. One of the Nobel laureate, Bert Holstrom's teaching about a class called Managing the Modern Organization, about more the strategy, plus a little bit of the macroeconomic side of things. So not often you can take a class with a Nobel laureate, except when I mentioned that to a scientist friend of mine from MIT. I say, well, I have to take that class despite the fact that I want to focus on entrepreneurial stuff, because how often can you say you've studied under a Nobel laureate? And you say, well, every day. Well, that's because they have physics prize, chemistry prize, and life sciences. So it's a bit unfair as a comparison.
And I think you're rattling off so much, right? And
Yeah,
if you
sorry
don't
about
get it
that.
all done in the 12 months that you're here as a Sloan Fellow, I mentioned earlier the executive electives. It's a way to continuously learn, to continuously come back to campus every January and sit amongst the current Sloan Fellows, the current EMBAs, and alumni from both programs and participate in classes. And they just finished their EMBA or their executive electives a few weeks ago. I think there were 17 courses. They're 2-day deep dives. So Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday was a whole new set of electives taught by fairly senior faculty around MIT Sloan that are sort of condensing their semester-long courses into this deep dive or continue like a more advanced level of something you've already taken. I am conscious of time. Do we have any questions from the internet?
We have one application question after, but the question is, we get a lot of questions about sponsorships. So the question is for both of you, how would you navigate sponsorship from your employer? If not sponsored, can you talk to us a little bit about your decision to potentially jump ship and go somewhere else?
That's a great question.
I'm not sponsored. Are you?
No.
No, so we know plenty of students who are. And there is, of course, a flexibility or constraints, depends on which side you come from. A lot of the fellows, certainly the Japanese fellows, they are very well sponsored, and they enjoy coming here to learn new things without necessarily thinking about transitioning into a different or having that 6 months of looking for a job. So being sponsored has its advantages, but it also means that you have to go back. Some fellows who are sponsored are thinking about what are the ways that they can work with the company to think about how they can potentially transition. But I think everyone have a different take on someone's sponsored or not.
If you are interested in having that conversation with your organization and it's not already part of the culture of your organization, I would recommend starting on our website. There is a great section dedicated to how to start that conversation. And we have folks on our team that can guide you through that and play a role in that at a certain point in the conversation. So it's not meant to be a black hole where you're sort of navigating it on your own, but we ask you to sort of get a feel, get that conversation started using those tools you'll find online.
I'm conscious I didn't quite finish answering the blockchain question, despite the fact I threw so much at it. So blockchain and money, it's a new course that is formally offered as of last fall. It has been taught for a couple of years prior. MIT has incredible network of blockchain people. The Media Lab, which is not part of Sloan, but is part of the MIT organization, has a group called the Digital Currency Initiative. They don't just focus on currencies, but they also focus on the blockchain, and they run student projects. So I'm involved. I'm actually leading a team looking into, well, the very fancy title is Oracle for Smart Cities with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. But we've narrowed it down to really focus on how can we use the blockchain technology to build a centralized information database that is trustworthy by parties, hence the name Oracle, to speed up and make the insurance payment network more efficient. So there are projects out there, there are courses out there, there are many research groups from computer science looking not just at this as a business angle, but as well as a technical angle. And half the fellows who took blockchain classes this year, I reckon there's probably about 20-25, took the technical course outside of Sloan in main MIT, and the other half took the blockchain money course offered.
Thank you.
So I'm going to run through quickly the admissions process and the tips for the application. I'm going to leave you with a question that I would love you to answer at the end, so I'll give you some time to think about it. It wasn't that long ago that you were probably sitting in their seats, either at home somewhere else in the world or here on campus. What is one piece of advice you would give to our group here today if you could tell yourself a year ago? Okay. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about what the culture of MIT and what our community looks like. We're ultimately looking for looking at candidates that are going to be great members of the MIT Sloan and Sloan Fellows community. I think if you're looking for a transformational experience to have a greater impact on the people around you, on the process within your industry and your function, and ultimately the product, then it's definitely a program that we hope you consider. I mentioned earlier being quant comfy. I often joke that you don't need to sleep with your accounting book at night, but you need to not have the little hairs on the back of your neck stand up when I start talking about econ and accounting and finance. You need to be interested in how you use numbers. You certainly don't have to come from a engineering or mathematics background. It's incredibly diverse set of students. Almost 30 different industries and functions are represented year over year. That means 30 or so different universities and undergraduate and master's degrees, should you have already pursued a master's degree. Being open to the transformational experience, being aware of what your strengths are, being aware of what your blind spots are, is really crucial to this process. I said earlier, you're going to get a fabulous education. I guarantee that here. What's most important is that you come ready to sort of peel back the layers of who you are in order to know how you want to be a more impactful person when you graduate from the program ultimately. So how do you get started? You're here. That's the first step. You obviously found our website. It led you to us. We have lots of virtual events. We have lots of on-campus events. And then some of you I've met across the US and even around the world. We start traveling again in the summer. You'll want to, I know we're at the end of our admissions process, but we do recommend that you start early. You apply when you're ready. If you're a non-US passport holder, you can still apply in round 3, which is our deadline we'll highlight in a minute. But if you're planning on applying in round 3, let's have a conversation offline about what those obstacles you may have to go through are in order to be ready to start school in Boston in June. And then we get a lot of questions about the interview. It is a required step in our process. We interview all over the world as well as here on campus. and it is by invitation only, so it's a step forward in the process. This is all outlined on our website. The two things we get the most questions about are the video statement and the, oh, it's not up there, the organizational chart. I'm gonna add that in tonight. The video statement is our opportunity to understand your personality, to see who you are, also your communication style. It is not meant to be highly edited. An iPhone works great, one cut. You can do as many as you want, but we just want one cut. I see them, people that love to cook, they do them in their kitchen. If they like to go in the park with their dog, they're in the park with their dog. Whatever represents your personality is still professional. It is business school. That's what we want to see. No editing, no lighting crew, nothing like that. Your organizational chart, there's a couple of templates embedded in the online application. It's really to help us understand where you're having impact in your organization. Who are the people around you? Who do you touch every day? Who are you working with across that table? How far up the command chain are you to senior leadership or to the ultimate decision maker? In the Sloan Fellows, it's very important that we see who you're leading. Are you in a management position? If you're currently in an individual contributor role, that's okay. We want to see, though, in your application where you've had experience leading teams and leading people in your past. But again, these are outlined in a lot more detail, and actually I think next week we're going to have an application tips chat, but we're always available to jump on a call and talk about these things with you. Quickly, our third and final deadline is coming up in just a few short weeks. There's still time, as long as you've taken your tests, your GMAT, your GRE, or your executive assessment. I think what's most important for me about this deadline is it's also your recommender's deadline. So it pains me, nothing more pains me than you working all night to get that application in and your recommender goes on holiday. Or you find out that their daughter got married the weekend before and they just didn't have time to complete it. So when you're choosing your recommenders, no matter where you are in this process, make sure they can meet your deadline. We don't have a rolling admissions, we review by deadline. Again, February 12th is coming up very, very quickly. So maybe we can take one or two more questions, but I am conscious of time on a Thursday night. Why don't I have you guys answer the question I posed to you? If you were sitting in their seat, or you were about a year ago, what's one piece of advice you would give to yourself?
Yeah, I think in terms of the interview, a piece of advice somebody gave me that was really helpful was rather than trying to memorize answers for all these possible questions that you could be asked, memorize 5 to 7 stories that demonstrate your leadership or maybe how you overcame a challenge. Because those stories you may be able to massage, and use one story could be an answer for a few different questions. So that was really helpful for me to try to think about 5 to 7 stories that really, showed, my leadership, global perspective, and maybe innovation from my prior work life. And I also think, interview sometimes comes with, certain connotations. It's going to be intense. I found the interview to be a really comfortable process, and they're not there to try to, trick you or try to catch you, with a question. Their job is to be your advocate with the admissions committee. So really, you're just there to give them a few data points that they can use in order to make the cases to why you should be the Sloan Fellow. So kind of looking at them more as your advocate rather than sort of the interviewer. I found those two things to be really helpful. And then when you get accepted, I think one thing that's really stood out to me is one of my teammates from the summer ended up hosting sushi parties. So he would pick 2 teams every, I think it was Tuesday night, and he would have them over for sushi. And so it was a really good way to kind of start networking within the class in sort of a smaller setting. And a lot of other countries have hosted events for the cohort. We've done a lot of group outings, and just those relationships outside of school, I think, everybody talks about the sushi party still, even though it's months later. So take that initiative to think about, how you're going to connect with classmates outside your classes.
How can people forget that fermented soya bean that everyone's trying to force everyone to eat? I will go. I'll go for more of a practical advice, I guess, away from the sushi party. What makes MIT Sloan different is MIT Sloan. You have MIT out there too, and with the whole curriculum that we have here, just at Sloan, covering hundreds of electives, my advice is to do research and have a plan, but a very flexible plan. As I've talked about my experiences, I want to come and do, machine learning stuff. But ultimately, I have pivoted to slightly different aspects of what this place has to offer. But I think you do need some kind of direction of travel, not just because it will make your selection of electives easier, but it also helps you really think about what you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And it probably will come up in your interview. If not, at least you can talk about it. So look at what MIT Sloan and the Institute has to offer. That would be my advice, because there's just so much going on, and you've only got 1 year. We've done nearly 8 months of it, and it's coming to the stage where we'll say it's actually getting quite sad that we will have to say goodbye temporarily, hopefully, in just after June's commencement. But there's not a lot of time for you to go and fully immerse yourself here to do everything you want. So have a plan, but be prepared that that plan will most likely change. But that's just a fact of life, I think.
Thank you so much. And if myself and Ian will stay around to answer any burning questions or lingering questions that you still have. I invite you to stay around, but I know that you're in the middle of a 3-day intensive course with Professor Curran. So, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone for, again, braving the rain, and thank you everyone at home. And have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Radoll, I'm happy to answer more questions if people have.
I have a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
What surprised you the most about MIT?
Great question.